Hi, everybody. We are continuing today our series Nurturing Faith in the Wilderness. We continue to sort of follow along the story of the Israelites as they journeyed through from Egypt to the land that God had promised them. And I was saying how, like God's people back then, they were in between two realities in the wilderness. It's the same for us as during this time of this pandemic. We too have come from one sort of place of existence, one reality we call normality, and we're heading somewhere else. We're heading for a new normality that lies ahead, a promised land to us that lies ahead. And so we're in this wilderness time as well, but do you know what? I'm keen for us to learn from God, obviously, from the stories of the people in the Bible. Well, how we can not only just sort of hunker down and make ourselves more comfortable, or as comfortable as possible, and hang in there for the time being, but how can we actually thrive? How can we nurture our faith during this? Well, they are particularly challenging and destabilizing times. I think you'd agree that the last, few months have been completely crazy, disorientating, downright scary for many people. Who would have thought right at the beginning of this year that we would have gone through months where employers have had to send their workers home either to be furloughed or to remote work from home. I mean, I wouldn't have even known before this pandemic what furlough was, so that's a brand new word I've added to my vocabulary. But I mean, who would have thought that we'd have gone through all these periods of weeks where we couldn't even leave our homes except to go do some essential shopping now and again? And when we do go do our grocery shopping, we have to clothe ourselves with like face masks and so on. And it's like we're spies, we're entering into foreign territory just to go and get our groceries. I mean, these really are crazy days, and they're uncommon circumstances. And uncommon circumstances, wilderness circumstances, they often cause fear and anxiety. And the thing is, it's not only the pandemic that's going on in our lives right now, is it? Outside of the pandemic, outside of what's happening there, we all have other things, challenges, changes, struggles that we're going through in life, and they haven't gone away. They're still there. The pandemic, then, it just kind of comes in and literally rests on top of all those things. It kind of compounds all of the other issues of life that we're going through. And again, that just is, then it's the source of even greater anxiety and fear. So in this section of the story this morning, what we're going to see is how the people of God, they found themselves having to make, huge life-changing choices right in the face of incredibly challenging times, and in a real scary situation. So we're following through the story in the book of Numbers in the Old Testament, but we've also been watching this short animated video created by the Bible Project, which is brilliant, and it's just really helping us get a good picture of the overarching theme then of the journey of the people of God as they move through from Egypt towards the promised land. So we're going to play the next little sort of small clip from that video that just describes this next section, which is going to take us up to what we're going to be talking about today. So let's have a look at that.
Now we're into the third section, the wilderness of Paran. This is where they send the 12 spies to scout out the promised land. 2 of those spies come back and they're really optimistic.
But the other 10 are freaked out, and they don't trust God, and they go around saying, we're going to get annihilated in there. And so they start a mutiny, and they try to appoint a new leader who's going to take all the people back to Egypt. And so basically, they are refusing to go into the promised land, and God honors their choice. He says that this generation is going to wander for 40 years and die in the wilderness, and only their kids will get to enter the promised land.
Okay, so this part of the story it kind of plays out like a real intense spy movie or something, doesn't it? God's he's getting his people a little bit closer to the land where he's leading them, and Moses he rounds up a dozen men from all the tribes of Israel that are with him, and he sends them ahead into Canaan. They are sent like scouts or like observers, spies, then to gather information, some facts about the land and all the people who are living there right now. And so these spies, they engage in this kind of covert mission. They stealthily make their way in to the various regions and the cities there in the land, and they're checking out what it's like. You know, who's there, what's the land like there, and they even steal some of the produce from the land before making their way back into the desert to sort of bring their report back to the assembled people of God there. And do you know, I almost imagine the conversation that these 12 spies had on their way back, can't you? It's like, okay, guys, what are we going to say? How are we going to report this to the others? And but you can imagine them sort of arguing with one another. Some of them saying, yeah, it really is a place just like God said it was. It's a land flowing with milk and honey. And then, of course, there'll be others there who will be saying, yeah, that's true. But we can't gloss over all the facts here. Did you happen to see the walls? Those walls, those cities, they're like forts. I mean, we don't have the means of scaling those sort of size of walls. And what about the inhabitants there? You see, they're huge guys. They are, they're geared up for war. These are like famous warriors. And look at us by comparison. We're just average Joes. We're average people here. Now, if I can just for a moment kind of bring us back into our present situation here in regards to the pandemic, we are faced with trying to deal with a virus which is still running wild throughout our country. It's already claimed the lives of more than 40,000 people in the UK, close to 1 million worldwide, and there, of course, they're just the cases that we're aware of, and we still haven't managed to get a control of it. There is still no known cures. There's no vaccines. There's very few treatments which seem to help people, especially those who seem to suffer the worst when they have it. We have a case where the world economies are in complete tatters. I mean, thousands of people in the UK have already lost their jobs. Many thousands more are going to lose their jobs this side of Christmas. I think there are real reasons for us to be not just a little bit concerned right now, Now, in our story here in the scriptures, we see this account where there is a situation ahead of the Israelites, and it's viewed from two very different perspectives. It's like one set of facts, it's one set of circumstances, and yet two seemingly diametrically opposing responses, opposite assessments. Of the 12 spies that went into the land, two of them, a guy called Joshua and a guy called Caleb, they saw all the obstacles. Yes, they saw the walls, they saw the giants, and yet they also saw opportunity ahead of them. And I just think, how do they do that? How can these two people see this exact same situation as the other 10, and yet only see this sort of positive opportunity? Or to ask that another way, how is it the other 10, they seem to see all the challenges, they give in to all their fears and anxieties. How is it that they only see the obstacles, they only see all the challenges ahead of them and not the opportunities? I think that these questions that we can ask of ourselves in this present situation, and again, whether it's the challenging circumstances that we face in relation to the pandemic, or if it's just completely disconnected from the pandemic altogether, again, from a single set of facts, a single set of circumstances, there are often two opposing views or two responses that we can dig into or lean towards. I think that this passage, it provides us with a couple of key pointers that I'm hoping is going to encourage us during this time of real uncertainty. So I'm looking about the difference of leaning towards fear or leaning towards faith. So, looking at the interactions and the conversations that we've just heard in this passage, the first thing here that we can extract is that fear focuses on the problem, whereas faith focuses us on the promise. So fear focuses us on the problem, and faith focuses us on the promise. Now, in Numbers 13, the passage which we had read earlier, we've come in back into this at verse 26 here. It says that they came back to Moses and Aaron and the whole Israelite community at Kadesh in the desert of Paran. There they reported to them and to the whole assembly and showed them the fruit of the land. They gave Moses this account: "We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is its fruit. But the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites live in Negev. The Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites live in the hill country, and the Canaanites live near the sea and along the Jordan." Then Caleb silenced the people before Moses, like, "Shut up, you guys." And he said, "We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it." But the men who had gone up with him said, "We can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are." And they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land that they had explored. They said, "The land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size." Again, it's this situation again. It's the same set of facts, same set of circumstances that present themselves to both these parties, and yet the 10, they focus on all the problems, they focus on the giants and the reasons for why they shouldn't go in, and the 2, they focus on God's faithfulness and the things that He's promised. That what it would be, the opportunity that lay ahead of them, the land flowing with milk and honey. So here before them is like a fork in the road, if you like. It's one group chooses the fear, the road that runs towards fear, and the other group chooses faith. And I think that for many of us, we've been aware of many forks in the road, as it were, over the past few weeks, right? I mean, which way should I turn? Which way should I go? The road of fear or the road of faith? I've heard, and been part of some real incredible stories, even from within our own church here over the last few months. Now, clearly, in all that we're going through, with all the uncertainty, on the natural level, or in a natural level, we would fear for our own futures, wouldn't we? We think, man, am I going to be able to sustain myself and my family financially through what we're going through? With all this uncertainty, we would, in the natural thing, I need to hunker down, I need to set aside money and protect our future and so on. And yet, what I've seen and I've heard of members from within our church stand at that fork in the road and just decide from a place of faith and say, I'm not going to take that road of fear. I'm not going to go down that road. I'm going to actually take a road of generosity. In faith, I'm going to be generous to others. I want to know how I can benefit others who are facing financial difficulty right now. And so I've become aware of people giving gifts and sending cards, words of encouragement and flowers and so on. I've even seen people taking hundreds and hundreds of pounds, thousands of pounds even, out of their own kind of safety nest egg or whatever you'd call it, and give it away to others. That's faith and trust in God expressed as an act of pure, radical kindness and generosity. And I tell you, it's nothing short of overwhelming to see when that takes place. When you are presented with a situation when the Lord makes you aware of a fork in the road, and it's not I'm not just talking about a financial fork in the road here. It's not just financial, not just about how we deal with our money. It's about how we deal with and how we trust God in all areas of our life, and where we're going to sort of practice and encounter His presence and His power. But the question is, which road are you going to take? Which road are you going to venture? Is it the road of fear, or is it the road of faith? The truth is that our circumstances have more than likely changed significantly over recent weeks and months, right? It may be that the levels of anxiety have also changed, has increased in all of this. And the thing is, whether it's related to COVID-19 or something completely unrelated to that, you may well have tall walls and big giants in your life that you feel maybe are just too big and too strong for you to stand against. But I want to remind us today that even in the midst of all this uncertainty and all this change and disorientation and so on, and all the anxiety, our God has not changed. God's promises, I mean, He promised in Hebrews 13 that He would never leave us, He would never abandon you. That hasn't changed. He said in Psalm 32, I'm going to instruct you and guide you along the best pathway for life. I'll advise you and I'm going to watch your progress. That hasn't changed. Jesus said in John 16 that even though you're going to know many troubles in your life, things are going to be difficult, then you can take heart and know God's perfect peace because He, Jesus, has overcome the world. That has not changed. You know, though we find ourselves in a world of complete uncertainty and change, He hasn't changed. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. So my prayer for all of us at this time is that, one day we're going to be able to look back on these days and we're going to have stories to tell of just how, my God came through for me on that day, in that situation. My God provided for me during that challenging time. My God was able to, He spoke to me, He spoke real peace into my heart at that time. And I pray, and I really do believe that this is going to be the testimony of many of us in the months and years to come. This was Joshua and Caleb's situation as well. This is what they were able to do. They were able to look at the situation, which was filled with uncertainty. It was an uncertain future. And yes, they could see the reality of what lay ahead, and they could see the scale of the giants and the walls. And yes, they were able to focus in on all of that, but they were also able to focus in and believe the promises and the faithfulness of God. Faith focuses on His promises. So the question for us today is, have you heard God's promises for your life? I mean, maybe you're here, you're listening to this now, and you've never pursued that in your life. You never looked and pursued what God's promises may be for you before. I mean, maybe this is a turning point in your life, and you need to start to investigate that. I'm going to investigate and dig into the promises of God found in the scriptures, for example. And then hold those up. So you lay hold of the promises that you find and say, okay, God, if this is your promise, God, I'm going to hold tight of this. I'm going to make this a promise for me and for my situation. If you have known God speak promises and hope into your heart in the past, and maybe you've kind of come to a place where you've laid that down, maybe, again, I'd say maybe today is a day that you, in faith, you pick back up those words, those promises and hope, and say, you know what, I'm going to go down the direction of faith. That's my choice today. I'm going to go in the direction of faith, and faith in what God has said to me, not what the circumstances would have me focus on. So that's the first point about fear and faith. Next point. Fear locks us up, but faith releases us. In the opening verses to the next chapter, chapter 14, it talks about how the Israelites they were presented with a choice of the promised land. This is one route you can go on, or you can go back to the desert, and they opted for desert. They just said, yeah, we're going to go for the desert. In fact, they said, you know what, we'd rather go back to Egypt than face those giants and try and conquer all the challenges that lay ahead of us. And I think this is absolutely crazy. They were literally saying that we would rather go back into slavery than press into the things that God had promised us. And I think that's what fear does. It so distorts our thinking that we begin to entertain ideas and thoughts that we probably wouldn't have even considered before. Now, it's absolutely true that there were tall walls. There's big giants there. There's absolutely no denying that. But in the face of all those challenges, all God's people want to do is just run away. Their default reaction is just, man, we'd rather turn back from this. I don't know. Have you ever done that? Have you ever been faced up by a giant in your life or a large obstacle, and have you just kind of just thought, I've got to turn around and run? I know. I certainly have, and that's what the 10 spies did. It's like this is too big. It's just too insurmountable. I'm off out of it. But not Joshua and Caleb. Their faith in God, it didn't permit them to be locked up by fear or to turn tail and run. Quite the opposite, actually. Their faith liberated them to action, to take action. And this is what faith does. Faith frees you, and it enables you to look into an uncertain future and step out, as it were, or to kind of step out, not knowing what the outcome could possibly be, but knowing that God is still with me. Now, I know there are people who have put their faith in God, all over the globe, people who work in like the medical world or in the care sector, so caring for elderly people, or treating patients and treating these people every day who have coronavirus. But I bet there isn't a single day that goes by where they don't get a real sense of like fear or vulnerability in their exposure to people with the virus. I bet they face that giant every single day of their life, and yet they're not gripped by fear. They don't run away, but it's kind of like in faith they are moved to serve. They're still moved to care for people. Some of you remember way back in April, Ange posted up on the support group a video. It was a video put out on social media by a Christian nurse, and she was working right on the front line, as it were, in all of this. And she was calling believers from all over to pray for all of them, pray for the NHS staff, she was saying. She was asking people to, quote, please pray for us, that we would remain fearless, because fear is crippling and we need to be fearless. I think it's really interesting how this Christian nurse, she linked getting into prayer, getting into that ancient practice of getting on our knees and praying as being a core component to her not slipping into fear. They were connected. And so in this situation where there's lots of fear, lots of anxiety, where that is a dominating factor, is prayer going to be the thing that we counteract that with? See, fear locks us up and faith releases us. Now, each of us have obstacles. Each of us have got giants in our lives, and they're really scary. Again, they may be connected to the pandemic. They may be something completely separate. But do you have the kind of faith in your life that won't permit you to become locked up or in fear or to turn and run away, but instead a faith that liberates you to step out and take action? If we can I can just give us a bit of a promo about a study group that we ran over the summer. Face Your Giants, it was called. I got to say, it was absolutely brilliant, and it was so good that I think we're going to be running it again real soon. So if you weren't able to sort of get in and be involved with that over the summer, do watch this space. It's going to come along. I just encourage you to sign up for that. But back in a story here, God, he was just so angered by the fact that the people wouldn't trust him. And in spite of all the powerful miracles that he'd done for them in releasing them from Egypt and so on. So he was so angry about that he wanted to destroy them. And though he was going to preserve Moses and a few of the others that actually trusted him, but he just wanted to destroy everybody. And Moses appealed to God by his grace and reminded him that by declaring, God, but Lord, you're the Lord who is slow to anger. You're abounding in love and forgiving of sin and rebellion, yet do not leave the guilty unpunished. So God honored the people's decision to not go into the land, and instead he kind of let them turn around. So effectively, he kind of sentenced them to 40 years of living in the wilderness. He forgave them, but at the same time, he is the God of justice. And he declared that actually none of you, not a single person of this current generation, will ever enter into the promised land, only a few faithful ones. Now, if I can just finish by sharing a personal story with you. Actually, it's not related to the pandemic in any way, but it's very much connected to us, Vineyard Community Church here in Daventry, and this whole sort of coming up to a fork in the road type, making, whether or not we're going to choose fear over faith or whatever. As I look back, it was for more than 5 years we had been meeting as a church in a large industrial building up on the on the High March industrial estate, and it was right at the end of 2017, and we were faced with the prospect of being turfed out of the property by Daventry District Council. They were selling the building, or we could stump up £23,000 a year for the rent. And so we kind of shared that with our leaders and the trustees and the whole church, and we prayed about that. I can remember the very first Sunday back after the Christmas break there, so just a couple of weeks later, I taught a message on stepping out and trusting God in difficult and uncertain times. In actual fact, God led me to teach using this very passage that we're looking at today, along with the other scripture passage which talks about the time where the Israelites, some 40 years later, actually entered into the land that God had promised them. And what is really quite regretful for me is that I really failed to connect that what we were going through as a church together, sort of the decisions surrounding the property and all that. I failed to connect that message, connect that with the message that I was sharing. For the most part, I was just looking at it from more of a personal level, like this morning, asking how do we as individuals allow faith to be the driver in our lives during uncertain times rather than fear. So looking at it on a personal sort of level there. Now, at the time, I was in a particularly difficult time, an uncertain time in my own life. I was in the worst stages of hearing loss at the time. Now, not that was an excuse, but it was another reason for why I was connecting the message back then to on that sort of personal level. I personally was sensing the immense pressure of giving up as a whole on everything that we were doing, and so I just couldn't cope. And so, as is always the case, I delivered a message. I was delivering a message that was just as much for me as it was for the rest of everybody else. Now, looking back on that time, I really don't think, I really do think that it was a faith or fear moment for us. Would we trust God to make a way through for this, or would we yield to fear and turn back? Would we turn away? And now we couldn't possibly see how we could raise the funds for the rent. We tried a couple of things, but they actually came to nothing. And it just seemed that forgetting all the ways that God had come through for us in the lead up to us being in our own property and so on, for many years prior to this, God came through for us so many different ways. But forgetting all of that, we set our focus on all the giants and all the high walls which were in front of us, just like the Israelites in today's passage. And it's like the situation made us like the Israelites again. It made us feel like grasshoppers. We felt very small compared to all the problems. So we gave up. We turned back. And so I guess in a way, the consequence of that has meant that we have been, as a church, we've been wandering or existing in another wilderness, so in a place that is not our home. Now, whilst many of us have been saying that, we are certain that one day we're going to be back in our own building again, and I had my amen to that. I absolutely believe that, but I can't help but wonder if that was ever God's plan A for us to walk away from the property that we were in, that situation back then. In my heart of hearts, I think not, actually. And I say that with regret, and I ask God to forgive me. I ask all of our people to forgive me, and that I chose to act out of a place of fear as opposed to faith. But I mean, just to turn the story around, it's not all negative here, but I just to introduce a kind of positive element to this. I wonder. I'm thinking, are we on another border to Canaan situation again? I think we may have another kind of promised land situation ahead of us. Just a few months ago, Angela and I were made aware of the fact that the Southbrook Community Association, because of the pandemic and various financial problems that they were going to have to close down. And they asked to meet with Ange and I because they were desperate. They really wanted us to take over the community centre property. And so Ange and I, we had a couple of meetings with them and we had a look around and so on. And we just thought, man, this is a great building. It's a great location. But it was just not quite right. I mean, we would need to do some work, or lots of work would need to be carried out in order to make it fit for our purpose or fit for God's purpose. And on top of that, it seemed that the council were only likely to offer a 3-year lease. Now, I guess 3-year lease might seem quite a long time for some of you, but trust me, 3 years flies past really, really quick. But the key thing is that for such a short lease, it meant that we would never be able to secure any sort of capital grants or anything from anyone to be able to carry out any of the work, the alterations that would need to do. So the result of that was that Ange and I just felt, I don't think it's right. And we just said, it's not right. We made it a non-option. We kind of put it behind us, as it were. Well, only this week, it was Nick from in the church. He brought it to my attention that the property was featuring again in the Daventry Express paper. And it turns out that DDC are desperate to get the community centre. Well, there was another 2 community centres involved as well in Daventry, but they're trying to get them up and running again. But so much so that they are appealing to people within the community and to community groups to take on the property. And now the really interesting thing is now that they are offering a 7-year lease, 7 years. And now that does provide us scope for gaining funding and grants and so on for building work and everything like that. So the short of this is that I'm wondering are we on the edge, another edge of Canaan moment? Is that where we are again? And I don't really know for sure. I've written to a couple of the senior council people that are involved with this. And I've expressed our interest, and I haven't heard anything back yet. But what if we are? What if we are on the edge of another promise of God, something that He wants to bring us into? Yes, there are giants. There are high walls. Like I said, there needs to be some significant amount of work, not a huge amount of work, but quite a bit of work needs to be done, some of which we could do ourselves, some of which we would need to get contractors in, all of which we'd need to raise funds to do so. And so there are giants, there are high walls, but what I'm saying, like what I have been saying this morning, are we going to allow our focus to be completely stolen by the walls and giants? I'm not saying we should minimize the giants, but also let us remember that God planted the Vineyard Church here in Daventry. He planted us here for a purpose, and He has way, way more to do in this town through us. He's been faithful to us in the past. For the last 20 years, He's provided so many times for us. And I think we need to allow our faith in His faithfulness and His promises to actually be the driver in all of this. Now, having shared all of that, it's not in the bag, so to speak. It's not a done deal or anything like that. We may not even be offered the lease at all. But all I can say is that I believe this could be a really good thing. I mean, can you imagine us emerging from this crazy season of disruption where we haven't been able to meet together, but imagine us emerging from this time and being able to relaunch in a new facility where we're able to spend the next couple of months getting it prepared. Imagine being able to relaunch some of the community serving initiatives that we've had to sort of lay down over recent years because we haven't had a building to run them in. Imagine many people from within the larger community reconnecting with the church and reconnecting with God, encountering His amazing love and His grace through some of the gatherings and the projects and things that we run from within the community centre. So all I ask is that you would join us as we pray about this over the coming weeks. Are we going to choose the road of faith or the road of fear? Let's pray.